knowledge down, whether that's in the source code, in Datadog tools, obviously tribal knowledge in Slack or Teams, just chat infrastructure. You kept asking questions, hopefully really good questions, and that led to you getting a better understanding of the system, the organization, and how things work. Once you knew that, you were able to be a productive member of the code base and the team, and of course, output high quality work. Well, so the problem now is your agents have this exact same issue. The only bigger problem is every time you type Claude in your terminal and it opens, it's you on day one. It's brand new, it's very intelligent, but it doesn't know how things work here. And therefore, it might generate code that actually doesn't fit your system and could take the service down. So what you need to give them is a context engine. This is an arc that we see across organizations. So we hear publicly that many, companies are AI pilled. They're using these systems, but when you go look at team to team, it's very different. Some are on the for me, the far left, which is in the tab complete model. So they are still the context engine. A simple example of this is when you're working in your IDE, you see an example output from your AI system that you can hit tab to accept. You think about it first and go, that's not right, and you hit escape. That's you operating as the context engine. As you move across this, of course, we move into context engineering, connecting MCPs and skills into these agent systems. You're basically building leverage and increasing the autonomy of the AI tool chain that you're working with to get work done for you. But every time you want to move from one level to the next, there's a lot of things that need to be in place to make sure that that works. This is something we call the gate framework. So you'll see at the bottom, there's links to our website where you can go through all these levels. And later we'll provide a tool that will help with an LLM map you to where you are on that scale. But what you'll see is, again, what's the ground truth about how operating at that level looks like? How do AI native teams operate at the same level? What are the tactics that you can take on in order to move yourself up to the next level? And then finally, a nice list of some exit criteria, which actually shows you that you're ready to level up. A big issue is if you have the wrong context, the cost of getting things wrong scales also linearly across this adoption pattern that we've seen. Because at the far left, again, as mentioned, if you see the bad output in your IDE, you just hit escape and it doesn't go into the code base. But if you have background agents running at the far right, and they get the wrong context, they don't source the right information because they made a random MCP call, they thought that Notion doc was correct, and then the agent runs away with it, it's going to open up a PR that's completely worthless. And the amount of compute, time, and tokens is just wasted. So you want to get this right. You want to level up appropriately and make sure that you go at it in a way that is scalable and is usable by your entire team and yourself and all of your agents that you're bringing. Some of the common approaches that you'll see in the market that people try where they get a little bit of success, but ultimately doesn't solve the full problem because they're glass ceilings, is first the curated context trap. Teams put shared repos, they take shared repos where they put rules, they put skills, they put a bunch of flat markdown files. But basically, this just introduces another form of documentation rot because those rules start to rot, let alone the fact that somebody on your team, depending on the size of your organization, has to be responsible and frankly omnipotent to know what goes in there, what's right at any given time. So you can see that this doesn't really work at scale. The next is the MCP plateau. This is where people just whack an MCP for every single tool that they use into their agent sessions. What this does is it eats a bit of the context itself by making sure that you have to cache the server descriptions and the tools themselves. And then the other issue is agents don't know when or why to call those necessarily. And even if they do, they suffer from satisfaction of search, meaning the first piece of information they find that they believe is correct in pursuit of the prompt you've given it, they will just use and run away with. They don't actually reconcile it against all the data in your org to choose what is right. And that can lead to some really bad outcomes. The last one is that background agent wall. Again, as mentioned before, you can't really just trust output without a human watching if you have bad context, because something that's trying to resolve an incident might just ship code that makes it worse and worse and worse until the human wakes up and looks at it 15 minutes later and goes, we have got ourselves in a pickle. So when you're getting these things and solving these issues, it's also important to understand how to measure that AI productivity. As mentioned before at the beginning, you want the outcomes to also scale along with the output quality. And how to get there is A, you're going to want to compare against history. So before AI tools, understand how engineering teams were operating. B, segment that AI assisted work. So separate out what was fully human written versus assisted by AI toolchain. And then C, aggregate it all up at the team level and then look at trend line changes. Reading industry benchmarks can kind of help you a little bit, but ultimately, from everything we've seen with the hundreds of customers that we work with, it's way more important to understand how your team operates at its level and get its own baseline and then track that from moment to moment. We have posts that will help you with this, but you can basically get your baseline in about 10 minutes across 4 metrics. The first is your cycle time. So what is the time it takes from the opening of a pull request to having it merged? You will want to use median for this. There's links in this deck will be provided that takes you directly to the calculation you can run. You just need GitHub or GitLab CLI and other basic bash calls. The next is review time. So the time it takes from first review or to get the first review, added with the percent of code that is merged with 0 reviews. This is really helpful, again, if you have a useful context engine. The output of the pull requests that these agents are writing are so good that you can actually merge them when your AI reviewer looks at it and goes, yeah, that's great. Looks good to me. The next is a novel one known as rework. So this is the share of deleted lines that were less than 30 days old. If you're a very fast moving team, you can adjust that number simply down to 14 days old. So on a biweekly cadence. But this is, you may be outputting more lines of code, but if you keep reworking those lines of code in production, that means that you're kind of just thrashing around and not necessarily moving in the direction of an outcome. Finally, you can track your defect escape rate. If you're unfamiliar with this term, this is the share of bugs that your customers find before you and your team did. Classically in software engineering, it is the cheapest to catch a bug when you shift left. So in local is the cheapest place. It's where you want to catch it in design and all those things. But if your customer is catching it, that means these defects are basically escaping your processes. And that is the most costly time to be dealing with this issue. So if you can make sure you catch them earlier in the process, that means you're working well with AI. Here's actually our outcomes from a team. So here at Unblocked, our cycle time is 21 minutes. I had to rewrite the calculations for us because we're moving so quickly. You'll see that they're usually hour rates in the post that we link. The review time, our average time to first review is 17 minutes, and 58% of our PRs are merged with 0 review. Again, I say 0, but we have AI reviewers in there. We are looking at the code. And then our rework is about 20.8% of our deleted lines. So we're a high velocity team because we have Unblocked. We have a lot of agents and agent swarms operating. So that 20%, that works for us. That feels about right, that sometimes we go over certain pieces of code. But for you, again, get your baseline. And then it's about tracking from timestamp to timestamp. And then finally, for our defect escape rate, that's actually a null for us because in order to do that calculation, you have to do labeling on your issues about what a bug is, and then if it was caught by a customer. For us, we didn't have a prior art to look at, so we're unable to make that calculation, but you might be able to. The thing that is most important here is when you think about your agents, what they can't see is everything below the waterline on the classic iceberg image. Agents can make code that compiles, but they do not know the original intent of the prompt, your team's conventions, past decisions, why we did this, all of this information they don't have access to unless you give them a context engine in order to look at and understand these things. And then when they get that, you'll see that they ship work that actually matches the system, doesn't take the service down and cause incidents, as well as are just more productive and faster. So the actual wall clock time to outputs is drastically reduced, and you have less of these doom loops with you and your agent where you go, what are you doing? You've made the wrong choice. You've done the wrong thing. Your team needs this context engine because it will also understand who you are and what information actually matters to you. Think about where you work across the code base, where do you ship code, who reviews your code, and what code do you review. It's able to resolve conflicts between sources. So often the code is the closest source of truth we have because that is what is running in production. But there might have been a Slack conversation last night between the CTO and a founding engineer that says we should do B now, where the code is running A. You need an engine that can surface both those things and present to you what the truth is, because truth in motion is what gets to the outcomes you need, not just someone's opinion. It needs to respect permissions and governance. This is fairly classic, but you have OAuth for a reason. You should see certain information and not see other information, especially in large organizations. So the system needs to not just have all the data and output it arbitrarily. It needs to respect those permissions boundaries and not give information to the wrong person or wrong agent acting on that person's behalf. And of course, deliver the right context to the right agent at the right time. So with unblocks, MCP, and CLI, which you'll see in a moment, making sure that the right data gets to it in a token efficient way is super important. So this is how a context engine should look like if you look out into market and consider these things. We also have open source tools, so you can take a peek at how we do this. But essentially, on the left side, you want it to connect to those tools and the data sources that matter to you and your organization. That's, of course, code, incident management, documentation, ticketing systems, and conversations like Slack and Microsoft Teams. And then on the right, it needs to be able to reason in the middle and then output depending on which sort of pane of glass that the customer or the agent is operating in to get the data that it needs. Down below are the 6 key differentiators that will show you a real context engine that's reasoning versus some layer of flat data that's not going to get you all the way. So zooming in on those 6 pieces, you need it to have unified system context. So this engine should connect to all of those systems, because then what happens is in its retrieval, when it gets data from Notion, gets data from Slack, and source code, it can actually look at all 3 in aggregate, how they relate to each other, and reason across entities. This is critical because that's how you get to the truth. Targeted retrieval is very important. So in the situation where you actually just have a linear issue or a JIRA issue, you want to be able to just pull that piece of information quickly and give it to an agent to move ahead. Let's pretend it's finally a good ticket that your team wrote for you. You just want to extract that in sub 1 second and move along. Conflict resolution, again, I've mentioned this quickly, but when you get that unified look at the system and all the entities, you often find something saying do A, something saying do B. You need to be able to resolve the conflict and get the truth to the person or the agent asking. Personalized relevance, this is knowing who you are, where you work, because when you say, I need to fix auth, that might be very different than when Susan asks that question over there on another team. So making sure that the engine scopes and understands focus of where you work is very critical. And then bleeding on that, the permission enforcement, of course, if Susan sees some information and I see other information, we need to make sure that we don't accidentally serve data that they shouldn't see. And then the final is token optimization. Tokens are expensive. Your time is even more expensive. So make sure that these systems that you work with, like the unblock context engine, when it gives a response, it should be finely scoped down to not waste the context window and to serve the most valuable information up front and allow the smart model itself to then discover more of the unknown unknowns from that and continue to query against the system to get richer and richer data that focuses it on the place it should be going. There's tons of use cases, by the way, beyond just code generation, as I've mostly spoken to. You can actually have Unblock, for example, as a context engine, write agent plans and code, of course. It can do ticket enrichment. You could run it in a CI runner, and then have it just enrich tickets automatically as they're created. It can, of course, do triage, incident management. We have code review out of the box as an application on top of our context engine. And then often customer success, sales, and all these teams that it matters to them what's running in production, they get a lot of value out of these systems as well, because they're able to make better decisions and inform your customers in real time about what's actually happening in the product and kind of move that story forward. Basically, through that whole thing that I was showing you, though, you don't need to get to level 8 and have a bunch of agent swarms running around. What you need to know is where you are today and how to level up to the next stage. So to help you with that, we have a setup system here at readiness.getunblocked.com. It's a chat with an LLM. It will ask you some questions, should take about 5 minutes. You just let it know where you're at, what you're doing, some of the realities of how you work today with which tools. And then it will map you to that chart that I've shown you earlier from level 1 to level 8 and give you specific, refined to you advice on the tactics that you can use to get to the next stage. So I encourage you to check that out. It's free, have some fun. And then the other thing that we have, of course, is the long form post. If you prefer to just read it all instead of chatting with an LLM, you can go to getunblocked.com/context-maturity. That's the entire guide. So you can see each of the levels, the gate framework as described, and understand what to do next. If you're looking for more open source tools, you can go to github.com/unblocked and look at our open source tool chain. We've done a few workshops with AI engineering in London and most recently in San Francisco at the World's Fair. Those are available to you. You can see them and actually go through the workshops yourself, as well as some of our open source tools to help you see what components of a context engine could do for you and your team. Where we're at is the gap is no longer intelligence, it's actually context. And I'd love to answer any questions for you. And I'm always available on LinkedIn or Twitter, as well as our org. Just reach out if you have any questions otherwise that I can't answer for you here today. But I'll now hop out of this and we'll chat. So hopefully this is helpful. The first question is, how does this compare to Google Knowledge Catalog? That is a precise question that I unfortunately can't answer because I am unfamiliar with Google Knowledge Catalog. I'd have to dig in. My assumption is that it's a graph that connects your Google service data together. The biggest thing I'd say is it's probably those 6 key unique variables. So making sure that it's able to reconcile conflicts in that data set, as well as do the reasoning across the entire data set, because you don't just want RAG, you want RAG plus semantic plus the ability for agentic retrieval in order to get truthiness and correctness out. Is it better to keep context separate from skills or organize it within skills as good context structure? This is a great question. Unblocked allows you to actually create skills in order to query one of our apps, essentially, is a question and answer that people put directly into Slack or Microsoft Teams, so that you're all probably engineering here. People ask you questions in a channel, and then Unblocked is able to answer those questions for you about the product, which deflects a ton of the time off typically like your on-call rotation engineer who's doing support for that week, so you can focus on other things. So you do sometimes want skills connected to context in the way that those skills help you extract information that you're going to immediately action. So I have skills, for example, that help me write customer facing answers. So whenever I'm doing support work, I'm DevRel, I forward deploy sometimes. I have skills to help me get out the data about Unblocked to help them connect it to their systems, their agents, etc. It's very useful. However, if you're checking in a bunch of skills that your team might use, like I have one called Babysit PR, and what it does is it pulls down, for example, all the PR review comments on my PRs, then it pulls on a 15-minute, and then it tries to resolve it. You wouldn't want to check that in beside code because that could distract from the context systems. The common pattern that I've seen in industry is people build an MCP gateway where either a platform team or a DevOps team, or now sometimes the AI team, curate that MCP gateway and skills that are directly usable for the team, like that perhaps Babysit PR, but they distribute it rather than storing it alongside the knowledge, because that might distract an agent because it will see it and think it's like supposed to do something with it. So there is nuance here as the industry moves forward, but hopefully that's helpful for you. PR review, CI pipelines. Oh, I like the word monstrous amount of codes here, Fernando. So this is a yes and a no. If it's a monstrous amount of code, uh, first of all, that's risky. More finely scoped changes is probably what you want, even with AI. Like, target around 100 lines of code changed across, maybe 3 files at most. Like, that's just good engineering practice. If you do need to ship these big ones, or you're trying to work with these, large agentic systems running in the background, like full AI the whole way through, and it's opening a 4,000 line of code change, you can implement validators, gates. We have a code review product at Unblocked out of the box that sits again on the same context engine. And it allows you to embed a risk assessment, for example. So you check in a risk assessment YAML that's scoped specifically to the repo. You can define that. So an easy one here is, one of the risks we have is if this file is changed, it's a high risk. Well, why this file? It's because it has 186 callers going to it. So we know if that file changes, there's a huge statistical likelihood that a human needs to look at that work. Otherwise, it's going to take the service down due to the incoming callers. So when you put those things in place, you're going to get a huge benefit in having a good CI pipeline, these rules, these risks, and get that analyzed. At the end of the day, if it's a monstrous amount of code, I truly believe a human needs to look at it at this time, because a human is who's in the Git blame, not a machine. You can't Git blame the machine and say, hey, you took the service down, Claude, what's going on? You can ask for its help, but again, that new agent is just going to try to help. It doesn't have the memory of what it did, no matter how much we try to put those in systems today. So my advice would be, learn to work with an LLM during your code review. So having a good context engine, again, like Unblocked, you can get that code review, get those validators, you get that sweet risk assessment. But then you also can pull it down into a chat session, both with your agent. So pretend in this case you're working with Fable 5 or something, and have it, look at the PRs, et cetera, and then go through the PR and help it read it out to you, understand it, and grok your system. That would be my advice. So I don't think we're fully out and free of human review. Oh, great question. We don't support it today, but we move very quickly for our customers. So if it's something that's important, as we start talking to you, we do 3-week POCs, sorry, proof of concept trials.